Welcome back to the Barrett channel. Welcome to another video. This video is about Meng Wanzhou, or Sabrina Meng, as people know her in the West by her Western name. And this previous week there's been a continuation of the court case. As many of you will know, she was arrested in a Canadian airport, Vancouver airport, as she was transiting through on a flight from Hong Kong to Mexico. And this was a very suspicious arrest in the first place, actually, and there's a number of reasons for that. But before we go into that, I just want to give you a little bit of history about the case and why she was arrested, and then we'll go on to talk a little bit more about the things that have happened this week in the court. Throughout this video, I am going to refer to my notes, so I won't be looking at the camera all the time, simply because there's a lot of facts and I want to make sure I get the facts correct. So I do want to refer to my notes throughout this video. So Sabrina Meng was arrested by Canadian authorities on behalf of the US on the 1st of December 2018 on allegations of fraud and conspiracy charges related to allegations that she lied to an HSB executive about Huawei's relationship with Skycom, a subsidiary that was accused of violating US economic sanctions against Iran. One of the reasons this was a really unusual arrest is first of all, previous to entering or transiting in Canada, she'd visited 6 other countries that also have extradition treaties with the US, and that was the UK, Ireland, Japan, France, Poland or Belgium. And had she have been allowed to transit through Canada to her final destination, she would have visited Mexico, Costa Rica and Argentina. Now, all of those other 9 or 10 countries have extradition treaties with the USA, but it seems that most, if not all of those, turned down the US's request to arrest and try to extradite Sabrina. It was only Canada that agreed to, or seemingly agreed to, undertake the task. And I would ask the question, why Canada? Is it that Canada were more amiable to US demands than other countries? Let me know what you think in the comments about that. Now, there are primarily 2 agencies involved here: the Canadian Border Services Agency and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Now, from here on in, I'm going to refer to them as the Border Agency and the Police, just for ease of understanding in the video. And one more thing that was very strange about this arrest is the judge in the Canadian court issued a warrant for an immediate arrest of Sabrina Meng. However, when she arrived to transit through the Canadian airport, she was taken into secondary by the border agency and questioned for some time, around 3 hours, before she was actually arrested, even though the arrest warrant had suggested that it should be an immediate arrest. So we will look into that a little further shortly. But before we do that, I just want to talk about something that was strange. One of the officers from the Canadian police on the previous day was summoned to sign an affidavit. Now, an affidavit is a very important piece of legal documentation. That is something that it's a statement that's made and it must be the truth. It's like swearing an oath in court, so it's something that is very, very truthful. But on that affidavit, to persuade the judge to issue this arrest warrant, it was suggested that Sabrina Meng had no ties whatsoever to Canada, which was obviously false. Many people know, and the authorities in Canada should have known, that not only does she own 2 houses there, but in the last 8 or 10 years she's actually visited and been resident in Canada for more than 50 times, and sometimes staying there for quite long periods of time. And later in court, when this officer was questioned, He says he was not aware of that. Now, I find that very hard to believe, as this was such a high-profile case. I also find it strange that even when he learnt of this, like he suggested in court, after he'd signed the affidavit, he didn't question it. So actually, his affidavit was actually false. He says he didn't really take in all the contents of the affidavit, yet previously he'd said he'd read it thoroughly. So again, there's some inconsistencies there in the statement of that officer. And as there had been a warrant issued for her immediate arrest, it's very strange that she was questioned for 3 hours by Border Services Agency before the Canadian police actually arrested her. And there's some really strange anomalies what occurred there. Initially, the border agency said she was wanted in relation to some possible espionage charges that were flagged up on their database. But later in court, that turned out to be there was no such entry in the database that suggested that. And actually, she wasn't questioned at all by border authorities for anything to do with espionage. She was asked about dealings with Huawei had with Iran, which seems very, very strange. The other really strange thing I find with this is that she was actually transiting through Canada. She was not actually trying to enter Canada. So when the Border Services Agency is suggesting that, we needed to question her regarding her entry into Canada, that just seems very odd to me. Don't know what you think about that, but you can also let me know down in the comments. So let's get on to a few other anomalies that occurred here. So she was kind of interviewed for 3 hours by the Border Services Agency before she was made aware of her impending arrest by the Canadian police. Now, that in itself is a violation of her rights, because had she have realised that she was going to be arrested, she would have had representation by her lawyer, or she could have requested representation from her lawyer. And some of her answers and actions she did might have been different if she'd have been advised by a lawyer. She was asked by the border agency to submit her electronic devices, and it seems as though that was under instructions to the Canadian authorities from the American FBI. So it does seem as though the FBI were sort of driving things in this. And interestingly, she had electronic items confiscated, and they were apparently accidentally given to the Canadian police. And that's a violation of protocol. The police should have never had those electronic devices given to them. And that was actually admitted in court by one of the border agency personnel. He says, had he have realised that, he would have got them back. But it's very easy to say things like that after the fact has happened. It's also interesting that a number of days later, the FBI requested some information from those electronic devices, the IMEI numbers. Now, to most people, those IMEI numbers mean very little, but to an organisation like the FBI, they can actually be very valuable. It allows them to trace calls and look at calls that were made, possibly look at text messages that were sent, look at location data. And I'm not 100% sure about this, but maybe they could even, access further information about Sabrina Meng from those numbers. And although in court the officers that have been cross-examined so far have denied that was the case, it seems that some other officers, which will be interviewed later in later proceedings in November, actually there was notes that referred to information going backwards and forwards between the Canadian authorities, the border services and police, and the FBI, or agents acting for the FBI within Canada. And what I also find is quite interesting. A lot of the evidence surrounding these messages going backwards and forwards, and communication between the Canadian Border Services, the Canadian Police and the FBI. The judge in the case has said that these documents are not to be allowed in court because it will compromise national security, and also may compromise the relationship between China and Canada and the US, which I find is kind of unbelievable. Some of the documents were seen in a previous court case, but they were heavily redacted, and again, that suggests that the agencies in Canada may have something to hide. Also, it was initially said by the border services that she was arrested on concern of espionage and national security, but later the agent Kirkland admitted in court that during the interview she was not at all questioned about any espionage or national security concerns. So that is another sort of red light to me. It seems that, to me, the reason for the arrest and interrogation by the border services was to try and gain more evidence of the case against her raised by the USA, to pass information possibly back to the FBI. But obviously, because the court has disallowed all those documents under the guise of national security, and even when they did see them, they were heavily redacted, I guess the truth will be never known about that. Officer Kirkland from the Border Services Agency also said in court that he had concerns about the violation of Mrs. Meng's rights, and but he didn't raise that, and he also said nobody else raised that. It's obvious to me that if he was aware that she was going to be arrested, as he was aware, that he should have raised that question, because if somebody's going to be arrested, they have a right to legal representation. And Officer Kirkland from Border Services also said in court that if an immigrant or somebody at immigration is questioned about a criminal offence, which obviously Miss Meng was, then they should be made aware of any arrest warrant that is out for them. Again, Sabrina was not made aware of having an arrest warrant, so again, another violation of her rights there. So let's ask the question, why wasn't Sabrina Meng arrested immediately that she left the plane? Well, kind of strange, but the officer in charge of arresting her, an Officer Yep from the Canadian Police, suggested that it might have been down to a security issue. It could have been a danger to other passengers. I find that absolutely ridiculous that the CFO of a multinational company would be carrying any kind of weapon or put up a fight had she been arrested as she was leaving the aeroplane. I think that's just the most ridiculous answer I've ever heard. Also, furthermore to that, she would have been screened before boarding the plane in Hong Kong. Had she have had any weapon or things with her, I'm sure she would have been arrested and interrogated in Hong Kong. So I think that is just really a ludicrous answer from the Canadian police, really. So let's talk a little bit more about the actual circumstances surrounding the arrest. So the officer from Border Services Agency, Officer Kirkland, agreed that there were two other possible ways the arrest could have been conducted. First, the police could have stopped Mrs. Meng and informed her of the active arrest warrant and her charter rights, and then handed her over to the Border Services Agency. Or the Border Services Agency of Canada could have adjourned their immigration examination until after she'd been arrested, given her charter rights, then she could have been handed back to the border agency for further questioning. At least if that would have happened, she would have had her charter rights and had a lawyer present. Also, during the court proceedings of last week, there's a large discrepancy between what the Canadian police are saying and what the Border Services Agency is saying. Yep, from the Canadian police suggested that they do not have any jurisdiction in the airport, and he claimed this several times during his cross-examination. However, when Officer Kirkland from the Border Services Agency was being cross-examined, he clearly stated that the Canadian police do have authority at the airport, do have a jurisdiction at the airport, and could have easily arrested Meng Wanzhou when she exited the plane, thus allowing her to have her charter rights. So I'd like to sum up my thoughts towards the end of this video. So personally, I think that it is a case that is politically motivated. The evidence is very, very minimal against Sabrina Meng for this case, and I think interestingly, actually, in this last week, the judge Holmes has said that new evidence can be submitted by the defence, and that evidence sort of puts to bed some of the false statements in the PowerPoint presentation that was given to HSBC. It seems the FBI, when they were submitting that evidence for her arrest, missed some kind of vital parts out of that. And as I said, the judge has now allowed those missing pieces of information to be brought in as part of the defence case, which is something which is very good. But as I say, I do think it's politically motivated. And I just want to read a couple of statements. The first is what Donald Trump said, and that says that Trump told Reuters he would intervene in the US Justice Department's case against Meng Wanzhou if it would serve national security interest or help to close a trade deal with China. And then on a French television program, Justin Trudeau went even further than that, and although it was in French, the translation is that Trudeau says, "We have told the US that they should not sign a final and complete pact with China that does not seal the fate of the Michaels and Meng Wanzhou." And I find that very interesting, and you know, that the more and more you look at the facts surrounding this case, the more you see that it is obviously politically motivated. And there is one other case that is very, very similar to this many years ago with a French company, Alstom, and America authorities arrested a senior executive from Alstom, and if you look at the whole story, that executive was quickly released once Alstom had done a deal to sell its technology and basically the company to an American company, GE. And this sort of seems very similar to that. You know, are the American authorities trying to get Huawei technology by holding Sabrina Meng to ransom? It seems so. But anyway, I would love to hear all your thoughts and comments, so please comment down below. There is some more of the case that will come to court in November, and I will update you once that is out. But as always, for now, take care.